Priceless treasures, stolen legacy pieces of history scattered across foreign museums, far from the true home. The fight to bring back Africa's stolen art has reached a boiling point. But why do colonial powers resist returning these artifacts? How can technology play a part in resolving this conflict? Hi, I'm Dr. Polan Kantwe, and welcome to another episode of Marula Bites, where we share and discuss trending news that are affecting the daily lives of Africans. Earlier this week, a documentary called Daume, which was directed by Mati Diop, was released in various countries, documenting the return of Benin bronzes, whereby it has made its way back to its original home. So, why are colonial powers still holding on to this specific cultural artifacts that are clearly not theirs and clearly needed to be returned given the atrocities of colonialism itself? Some say it's about preserving world history, but who decides what part of the world gets to keep it? Many European institutions argue that they are protecting the art, that these pieces have become part of their own cultural identity. But this begs the question, who can claim ownership of something you have borrowed to protect or even stolen? This is a fundamental question. In a time of you being a colonial power where you were judge and jury, do you honestly have the right to keep artifacts of your colonial or your colony post their sovereignty being given to them? That's essentially the question, because this British Museum Act essentially prohibits the return and only allows, under certain special circumstances, the borrowing and the showcasing of some of these artifacts under the pretext of being the world's library. But who makes that choice? Should they make that choice? What does it mean for the African culture? Now, I can think of many things of why this has such a deep impact. But let's take one specific example: the ability of African countries to create an arts and culture department that is self sustainable. No country in Africa that I know of has a thriving art and culture department or ministry, mainly for the pure fact that all of them were colonized. And at some point or another, culturally, they were asked to assimilate to the colonial powers' way of life, way of speaking, way of dressing, way of communicating, way of studying. And in a way, having these cultural artifacts post colonialism would have essentially enforced a redress of cultural norms, a redress of psyche, of inferior complexes that a lot of Africans still have. And this is case in point, where for you to be able to understand what your ancestors essentially valued as part of their cultural norms, you have to get a visa and travel to London to get that exposure. How can technology play a part? There is clearly a way of potentially merging this gap of tension, this gap of looting, this gap of complete and utter denial of having stolen or borrowed, and essentially two sides that are really at lockhorns. Technology could potentially play a part in terms of finding a middle ground with through 3D printing and 3D scanning. Now, I'm not saying that would be a long-term solution, but at least you will start seeing a major effect of cultural artifacts either in the current country where they're held in terms of duplicates, or in the original country where they should be relocated, where there's a transition of art pieces being replicas already being shown and displayed and allowed children and adults basically to understand how those things work and whether they can get some value out of that. For me, that is a no-brainer. But now the question is, why isn't there so many technology companies, both African and European, working on this? This essentially could be a remedy. Of course, I'm not claiming to know all the details, but I do think from a technology perspective, there is value in trying to figure out how this can be made to work. Cultural artifacts do not belong in the shadows of museums. African specific cultural artifacts belong in chiefdoms, in kingdoms, in the halls of kings and queens, in the hands of African children, in the hands of African adults that can explain to us where it came from and how it can be related to the culture that we have today and the connections that are often not written in books, are often not written in exposés, but are in the minds of the people who have lived through them. Cultural artifacts belong to where they've come from.